Welcome to ScreenMDM Talks, hosted by me, Mantu Daswani. This episode is produced in association with APOS. Use the code provided for a 10% discount.
Hello, welcome back to ScreenMDM Talks. Today we're joined by Vivek Couto, Executive Director and Co-founder of Media Partners Asia, a media consultancy with an incredible audience analytics platform called AMPD, and the organizer of the always amazing APOS, which attracts about 600 delegates to Bali every year for days of intense conversation about the trends reshaping the Asia-Pac ecosystem. Hi, Vivek.
Hi, Mancha. It's great to join you on your new platform, ScreenMDM. Congratulations to you and your team, and really excited to be here. Good morning from Singapore.
Thank you so much. So, before we get into some of the themes, I'm just curious your sort of conversations you've had with folks over the last couple of months. What's your sort of temp check on the mood of executives as we head into APOS this year? Obviously, it's been another transformative year in Asia as it has been everywhere else. But how do you think folks are feeling this year?
Well, to sort of be cliched and use a Dickensian metaphor, it's the sort of the best of times, worst of times analogy, right? Best of times, because as you know, and I know you've been writing a lot about, where the focal point for the latest innovations in the creator economy, what's happening with retail media and commerce, what's happening with AI, what's happening in connected TV, and what's happening in microdramas. The worst of times is because of the macro issues, particularly with the war, which is having a huge impact on visibility for advertisers that power a lot of the big markets in this region. So whether it's India and Indonesia on the emerging side, or whether it's places like Japan, Australia, and Korea. So we're starting to see a softness in Q2, but the longer the war that goes on, the more dangerous it starts becoming, particularly after Q2, particularly you start going to Q3 and Q4. So that's something to look at. And it starts hurting consumer sentiment and consumer expenditure in Q3, Q4. So that's the sort of black cloud. And we seem to have this black cloud every year since 2020, since the pandemic.
Indeed.
So those are the issues, if I may, Sally. But people are very excited, Mancha, about two or three things in this region. One, the big screen, right? And what's happening, particularly the growth of connected TV. What does that mean for, if you're a content creator, for a sports rights owner, you're an advertiser and a streaming platform? The second thing is AI. I know there's been some issues in the US, some issues in Europe. Here, it's incredibly liberating for content creators, for Asian studios, for Asian broadcasters, and we'll get to that, and for streaming platforms. The third is formats, right? Vertical content, which you've written about, and microdramas, and what that does. And I think people feel, look, we'll talk about monetization, which we're going to talk a lot about at APOS. But the point is, you have to start whether these things drive engagement. And the answer is yes, particularly on mobile. And it is driving a lot of engagement, particularly, Mancha, the content from the United States, which is localized for these audiences. That's driving it. And it's interesting, the microdrama monetization is actually happening in the two big streaming markets ex-China. It's Japan and India. There's a lot of focus on Southeast Asia, but it's actually Japan and India that's driving a lot of monetization, and we'll talk about that going forward. One of the things as we enter this year's APOS that's informing the agenda, which looks, we like to think, somewhat radically different from what we had before, is because our focus is where entertainment goes next, and what we call the new geography of attention, which I know ScreenMDM has been focused on as well. And it's really the clear recognition that the most valuable companies in entertainment today are not entertainment companies, and that's really shaping the agenda for APOS, because we're a media, technology, and sports conference, but we have to look at these changes. And so when you look at the leaderboard of our conference and you process it, the three biggest companies in the room are actually AI companies with technology, with platforms. They're Byte Plus, they're Google, and they're Kling AI. So there's not Disney, not Warner, not Paramount Skydance, and so forth. And those three companies are powering a lot of conversations today, not just with YouTube and TikTok, which are their own platforms, or Kuaishou and Kling AI's case, but also working with a lot of, I would say, content creators, broadcasters who have big libraries and producers, to reimagine the revenue streams they can create, and to become incredibly efficient and optimize on costs. As revenues get reimagined, as new revenue streams get unlocked, particularly on commerce, which is an important stream as well, and particularly on new forms of advertising, you're still having to be very lean and optimized on how you look at contents. And that's not, by the way, just about investing in content. That's also about engineering, on technology, on production operations, on production tools. And I think everyone's realized no one's going to replace human beings with these AI tools, but it's really about how you use these tools to become more efficient in your production side of the business, but also on different sides of the business. You'll hear at APOS from a few platforms that have used AI to dramatically increase their personalization and relevance and interactivity on their streaming platform. So Geo Hotstar, compared to what it looked like 12 or 24 months ago, is a very, very different platform.
That was a lot. That's a lot for me to unpack there. But
Yeah.
one thing that I've thought of as I've come out of a lot of events lately has been, I heard complaints at MIPCOM that it was like too much about YouTube. There were two rival events happening in April for the sort of the European content business. There was Content Europe and Stream TV Europe. One was about the content and one was about the tech and the advertising and the technology powering everything. And I think seeing those two things as separate does seem weird to me. So as you're crafting your lineup, how do you think about that? How do you think about where people are in the ecosystem right now and where they are in their own digital journeys and having to reach every single one of those different sort of spaces within our business?
No, look. I like the way you frame it. I mean, we look at this region and we look at APOS as the hub for the screen economy, right?
Yeah.
So whether Mantra's trying to monetize on mobile or on big screen or on theatrical or different kind of screens or even outdoor surfaces and all of that, that's all important to us. But I think we also recognized that the language of attention and the focus of attention and capital has started to move away from people making content to people who aggregate content and
Yeah.
aggregate eyeballs. And that's the issue. And people are trying to figure, whether you're a sports rights owner in the region or whether you're a content creator in the region, everyone's trying to figure out. They have the big four streamers and those kinds of players, big local players. But also everyone's trying to figure out, how do I participate in the creator economy and make money out of it? How do I sell a sports rights package to YouTube and work with them in the stream economy? So both sports and entertainment players are trying to figure out how to work in the wider digital economy. How do I partner e-commerce platforms? How do I partner digital platforms? That's, for us, a big focus. Also, the other part of the focus is also to recognize that wherever TV is still a strong medium, and it is in certain markets, there's still a lot there to monetize, right? Through connected TV or through free ad-supported television, which India is starting to do, or through different forms of collaboration. And even through last vestiges of pay TV distribution in some of these markets. But I think what we are doing is trying to provoke and shake up the room a little bit as well. And for sure, there are a lot of people with an urgent mission statement in Asia to develop new strategies to confront and participate in streaming, number one, to create content that works for streaming, but also for what I would say the 18 to 35 generation, which is massive in Asia, right? It's the fastest growing segment. And so how do I create content that is part of that and really drives that? You wouldn't have had two creators in APOS, never mind last year, but anytime. And so they're now on day one in the morning with TikTok, because I think what we want to show there is, well, what do these two creators do? Why do they have such huge followings in Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia? And how do they work with TikTok? And how are they monetize? And the same thing with YouTube, later on in the day. So I think we have to look at these big platforms in a holistic way. But also, as you know, Mancha, we're very big on trying to identify where there's a strong, scalable, local player in these markets. And that's why obviously we have a lot of focus on Geostar in India,
Yeah.
on Unext in Japan, on Nine Entertainment in Australia, on TVing in Korea, and many
Mm.
other players. And we also want to highlight how people are working together. Collaboration and partnership is also very, very important. So we have a session which is really interesting with James and Julie from TVing on their collaboration, because obviously CJ is a strategic partner now for Warner
Mm.
for Korean content.
Right.
And what's interesting, and you'll see this from the app data, it has worked really well. It
Mm.
is one of the big sources over the last 4 months of acquisition and engagement for Max. So to really understand how a partnership like that came about and how it drove that ecosystem, and that's also something we're looking at as well in some of these markets, right? How the collaboration side is working out.
Sure. And then you mentioned James Gibbons from Warner Bros. Discovery. Obviously, you always have sort of the regional head honchos of big US based companies. You also tend to have really good representation from the global C-suite level as well. And I'm just curious, again, that balance there of looking at Asia from a holistic Asia perspective, deeply local, but also feeding in on top what is happening on the global market, because obviously what is happening in the biggest markets around the world will also impact what is happening in Asia.
Couple of disclaimers on that. I think there is a bigger divergence between the United States and Asia today than there was, say, when we first started at APOS in 2010. That's and that leads to a lot of complexity. The second disclaimer I would say, we found out and that's why we have these big local sort of focuses within APOS, that it's so different. Yeah, definitely
Mm.
Southeast Asia is there. India is a complete lord unto itself and a lot of growth potential itself, and Japan is as well. And so you have to dedicate certain sessions. That being said, we're very interested in global leaders at APOS who are able to bring a perspective on what they're doing. So Rahul, who leads Crunchyroll, which is an incredible example of fandom and niche, a lot of focus in Sony's acquired it and how it's grown. Not just globally, but in this part of the world. They've
Mm.
just launched Thailand. They're launching across multiple markets, and
Wow.
how they work across the different screens that we talk about, including theatrical, including with the gaming players. So that's really, really interesting to us. I think it's really interesting also to have a perspective from someone like Thomas Tull,
Mm.
who used to be the CEO of Legendary Entertainment. He's really, really interesting on what he's doing on um, AI. And because there are certain companies who might take heart with that, and certain companies who might be, a little bit more scared about that. It's something that Sanjay Gupta alluded to last year. I think his thesis is much more focused on not just about using AI as tools, but actually
Mm.
running your whole organization into an AI-based organization. And there are certain companies
Huh.
who are embedding AI across all ecosystems. And then obviously we're
Mm.
getting good perspectives, so good perspectives around the people who head up US studios in Asia. Chris Taylor, who I think is based in Australia, but he's been here now for 1 year running NBCU, is speaking on a session with Unext, Sony, and also Nine, really about in 2026, where does US content sit in the region, Mancha, in terms of Hollywood content? And what's the future in terms of working with these big local players when Sony's given a pay one, as you know, to Netflix globally.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? NBCU doesn't have a streaming platform like Warner or Disney. So what does that mean for their strategies? And more importantly, from the platforms, they're going very local and they're going very sports. And that brings me to the other theme that's a big focus at APOS is sports, because
Mm.
every platform that is scaling in the ecosystem has a very discrete and significant sports strategy. You have
Yeah.
YouTube and Netflix on one side, obviously GeoStar, obviously TVing, obviously Nine.
Mm.
So all the successful cases and Unext are focused on these twin pillars of local and sports, but Hollywood is still interesting. I think people sometimes oversimplify the Hollywood argument in Asia by saying, oh, it's no longer driving engagement. Still drives a lot of engagement in
Mm.
Southeast Asia.
Mm.
The big discussion you'll see is every platform that invests in Hollywood and US content still uses it as a very, very valuable tool for acquisition, for
Yeah.
customer acquisition, particularly movies. And that's why it's resonating.
So we talked a little bit about the speakers. We talked a little bit about the agenda. There's so much. Is there anything else you would really like the Screen MGM audience to know?
Because for us, is we also are focused on microdramas. We're very
Yeah,
lovely, lucky to have Joey Gia uh, there on day one, who is a leader in the US.
yeah,
And, he's running close to a run rate business of about $1 billion in revenue on Real Short and Crazy Maple Studio. A lot of it is driven by Real Short.
yeah.
And most of that, as you know, I think more than 50% of that is coming from the US. So look, we want to understand how he built the business, but more importantly, the economics of attention, where he sees it going forward. How
Mm,
do you become profitable in this format? Is it built to last? What is the impact of AI, right? Because a lot of these microdramas are 100% AI reliant. Joey and Real Short and Drama Box still have a human element. They still have a so-called premium element. Is that a distinguishing factor? So
mm,
what does that happen in content creation? What will be the impact of TikTok going aggressively in this space? They have
yeah.
TikTok minis. They have their own platforms. How does it work out? And of course, what's his strategy for Asia? He's
Mm.
doing a lot of stuff in this region with AIS and a few players in Japan and so forth. So I think it's interesting. And then on day two, we have some really interesting sessions with Cole and a few players from Korea, a few players from Southeast Asia. And this is going to touch a lot of our discussions from everyone who's investing in this space, whether it's View or Video or Geostar and so forth. I think that's really, really interesting. Where people are going with platforms and personalization on how they evolve and dramatically cater for new tastes and new personalization and different things using it doesn't matter. I mean, we'll talk about how they got there, which is obviously a lot of AI users, but what does that look like? And I think that's a big factor from everyone, right down from Geostar, which is hugely scalable and successful, to someone like Suka in Malaysia. I think that's going to be a very big theme. Immersive experiences as well, Mancha, very important. I mentioned AI at the top. I mean, we can't forget John Zepp and his session with Andy Serkis and Joshua,
Oh,
which is really not just purely about AI. It's about AI, but it's really about how that engenders a lot of flow for experiences and immersive experiences, and that sort of translates back to what Simon Robertson's talking about with the Harry Potter IP and the growth of
sure.
that Warner's business, which gets a little bit overlooked. But that side of the business, from immersive IP to consumer products, is actually been a very big business for Warner in the last 3 years. And that's our focus on that, because it can't just be about streaming and content licensing. You've got these other revenue pools that are really, really interesting.
Vivek, is there anything else you would like to tell me about APOS 2026 that we haven't covered yet?
No, look, we got a really good CEO forum where we also have the head of Byte Plus speaking about how they're going to be working with content creators. Obviously, they overlook Seed Dance,
Mm,
and that's really interesting. We have an investor session that's focused on where the money's going next. And much a lot of the focus on investment right now is all about microdramas and
yeah.
AI content, AI production tools. Interesting to look at that side of the business as a result. We have 3 great receptions opening first day and the second day with some great partners including Netflix, Geostar, and La Liga.
Amazing.
And I think we're expecting a good sized audience. But to your point, Mancha, particularly where the industry is evolving to, which is now not just streaming, but a complete transformation
Mm,
in the way content is produced and monetized, but particularly in the way it's produced and created. Um, is going to be a lot of provocative questions and topics on where entertainment is headed next. And that's
yeah.
sort of the focus. It's really about the future rather than being too navel gazing on where we are at and, what was the macro driver of the last 6 months.
Right.
I think it's going to be really focused on, what are the aspirational goals going forward. And a lot of that's going to be driven by what's happening currently in engagement.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to those marathon sessions where I just sit in that room all day and type as
No,
I
no, you'll
soak in
get a
all of
good
this
break as well.
information.
You'll get a good break as well. We've put in tea and coffee breaks, and we've tried to restrict
Yay.
our speakers to the top 50 speakers rather than having 80 sessions. So I think it'll be good, and there'll be lunch. And I think each session, to your point, is really interesting, because these are players, either whether they're operating like Rahul or Crunchyroll, they're
Mm,
operating around the world, or real short, which monetizes mainly in America, but they're also investing in this part of the world.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, Vivek, thank you. This has been lovely. It's really good seeing you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Bali.
Thanks for listening to the ScreenMDM Talks podcast, hosted by me, Mantra Daswani. Kate Roach is our VP of Global Ad Sales and Business Development. Production was done by Anand Patel. Musical score performed and composed by Jahan Raymond.